The midnight session at Stax. March 1972. The lights inside Stax Studios were dimmed low, just enough to cast long shadows across the recording floor. The room was quiet, but not calm. There was a heaviness in the air, the kind that makes people speak softer, move slower, as if something important is about to happen. At the center of it all stood Elvis Presley. He wasn't moving much, just standing there at the microphone, gripping a sheet of lyrics. But this wasn't just another session, and this wasn't just another song. Most fans would later hear "Always on My Mind" as a timeless hit, smooth, emotional, unforgettable. But the people inside that room that night saw something very different. They saw a man unraveling. 1972 wasn't just another year in Elvis's career. It was a breaking point. Behind the fame, behind the performances, his personal life was quietly collapsing. His marriage to Priscilla Presley had fractured. Something that had been building for years had finally reached its end. And now, standing in that dim studio, Elvis wasn't just singing. He was confronting it. The first take began. Soft, controlled, careful. But it didn't last. Halfway through the song, something shifted. His voice tightened. The words started to weigh more. It was no longer about hitting the right notes, it was about getting through them. The room changed. Engineers who had worked with Elvis for years, who had seen him command stages and dominate recordings, started exchanging quiet glances. This wasn't the same man they were used to. This was different. The second attempt didn't go much further. There were pauses now, hesitations, moments where Elvis seemed to drift, not forgetting the lyrics but feeling them too deeply to continue. It was as if every line was pulling something out of him he couldn't control. And then came the silence. No one spoke. Not the producers, not the engineers. No one dared interrupt whatever was happening in that moment. Because what they were witnessing wasn't just a recording session. It was a confession. By the time the take ended, the atmosphere in the studio had completely shifted. What started as a routine session had turned into something raw, almost uncomfortable, like watching someone expose a part of themselves they were never meant to show. And for the people in that room, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a song about regret. It was his regret. And the truth hidden inside those lyrics would stay with them long after the music stopped. The ghost of Priscilla. For years, the story seemed simple. Always on My Mind was just a public apology, a song aimed directly at Priscilla Presley. The timing matched, the lyrics lined up almost too perfectly. A failing marriage, regret, missed chances. It all felt like a confession set to music. But behind the scenes, there was something deeper. Something Elvis didn't want the world to fully understand. Because this wasn't just about saying sorry. It was about admitting he was too late. When you look closer at the lyrics, they read less like poetry and more like a timeline. Moments he missed, words he didn't say, affection he held back until it no longer mattered. Every line feels tied to something real, something lived. And for Elvis Presley, that reality had a name. Priscilla. Their relationship had always lived in two worlds. The public saw glamour, fame, perfection, but privately distance had already started to grow. Long tour, long absences, and a silence between them that no spotlight could hide. By 1972, that silence had turned into separation. And suddenly, the words of the song weren't hypothetical anymore. They were final. That's what made it so difficult. Elvis didn't just struggle to record the song, he struggled to accept what it meant. There were moments where he hesitated, not because he couldn't sing it, but because he understood it too well. He knew what people would hear. But more importantly, he knew what he was hearing. There's a reason he was initially reluctant to lean into the track publicly. Performing it live meant opening a door he had spent years keeping shut. It meant showing a side of himself that didn't fit the image of the king. Not powerful, not untouchable, but broken. And then there were the recordings. After sessions ended, Elvis had a habit, one that few people talked about openly. He would sit alone, replaying takes over and over again, not to check pitch, not to critique performance, but to search for something else. Truth, in his own voice. He wasn't listening as a performer. He was listening as someone trying to understand what he had just revealed, sometimes rewinding certain lines, sitting in silence after others. Almost like he was hearing the message for the first time, just like everyone else would. Because deep down, Elvis understood something most people didn't. This song wasn't really about the past. It was about a future he could already see slipping away. A future where the person who once defined his world would no longer be part of it. And that's what made it unbearable. Not the regret, but the realization that some things don't come back, no matter how honest the apology is. The stunning admission. It didn't happen under stage lights. There were no cameras, no microphones, no roaring crowd to witness it. Just a quiet moment backstage, and a question that had been building for months. Is this for her, Elvis? The assumption was obvious. Everyone believed they already knew the answer. The song, the timing, the heartbreak, it all pointed in one direction. Toward Priscilla Presley. But Elvis didn't answer with words. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. And in that moment, everything changed. The image wasn't of a former lover. It was of his daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. That was the truth he had been carrying. Not just heartbreak, but something deeper, heavier. Guilt, because while the world saw Elvis Presley as a legend, an icon who could command any stage, there was another role he quietly struggled with. Being a father. The life that made him famous also kept him away. Endless tour, long nights, entire stretches of time where the distance between him and his daughter wasn't measured in miles, but in moments missed. Birthdays, conversations, simple days that never came back. And when you listen to the lyrics again, really listen, they begin to shift. Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should have. It stops sounding like a line to a partner and starts sounding like something far more personal. A quiet admission from a father who knew he hadn't been there enough. Those closest to Elvis began to notice it. During certain performances, something subtle would happen. A glance, a pause, a moment where his focus drifted away from the audience and toward a specific part of the room, where his family was seated. It wasn't dramatic, most people never caught it. But for those who knew, it was unmistakable. He wasn't just singing to the crowd. He was singing for someone. That's what makes the story so powerful. Because the world heard a love song. But Elvis was delivering something else entirely. A message. Not just to someone he had lost, but to someone he was afraid of losing in a different way. Not through separation, but through absence. And once you see it, you can't unhear it. The pauses feel heavier, the words feel more fragile, the emotion hits differently. Because now, it's no longer just about romance. It's about responsibility, regret, and the quiet fear of realizing too late who needed you the most, the legacy of a heartbreak. Elvis Presley never publicly explained the truth behind "Always on My Mind." He carried it with him all the way to the end. But if you walk through the quiet halls of Graceland, there's a feeling that still lingers, not just of fame, not just of legacy, but of something unresolved. Because this wasn't just a hit song. It was something closer to a final confession. By the mid-1970s, the song had taken on a life of its own. On stage, Elvis Presley would perform at night after night, but it was never routine, not for him. Some performances were controlled, polished. Others weren't. There were nights when his voice would waver, moments where he'd close his eyes a little longer than usual, times when the emotion didn't just sit beneath the surface, it broke through. And the audience could feel it, even if they didn't fully understand why. Then came one of the most talked-about moments. A performance where something shifted mid-song. Halfway through a verse, Elvis raised his hand. The orchestra stopped. Just like that. Silence filled the space. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The crowd didn't even react. They were too caught off guard to understand what was happening. Elvis stood there, looking out but not really seeing the audience. As if he had gone somewhere else entirely. Somewhere private. Somewhere painful. Then quietly, he gathered himself and signaled for the music to continue. The show went on. But for those who witnessed it, it didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like something real had slipped through. After his passing, the meaning of the song didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. For Priscilla Presley, the song would always carry echoes of their shared past, the love, the distance, the things left unsaid. But for Lisa Marie Presley, it became something more personal, more intimate, a message that seemed to grow louder with time. Because when the noise of fame disappears, what remains are the moments that mattered. And the ones that didn't happen. Fans have debated it for decades. Was it a love song? An apology? A farewell? Or something else entirely? That's the thing about Elvis. Even at his most exposed, he still left room for mystery. And maybe that's why this story still resonates. Because it forces a question that goes beyond music. A question about timing, about priorities, about the things we think we can fix later, until later doesn't come. This is what the Elvis Rewind journey has always been about. Not just celebrating the legend, but exploring the what if. What if things had been different? What if the words had been said sooner? What if the people who mattered most had been closer? Elvis Presley had everything. Fame, power, influence. But in the end, the story behind this song suggests something far more human. That even a king can realize too late what truly mattered. Now it's your turn. When you listen to Always on My Mind, what do you hear? A love song? A regret? Or a message that was never meant for the world at all? Share your interpretation, because sometimes the truth of a song isn't in what was written, but in what was felt.